Welcome back to ThinkTech. I'm Jay Fidell. This is American Issues Take Two. And the question before the House is, are we doing enough to help Ukraine? Whoa. And if we aren't, what happens then? And we have my regular co-host, Tim Apicella, and our regular contributor, Stephanie Dalton. Our panel is going to discuss situation in Ukraine, the current Russian offensive, such as it is, the state of the Russian military, such as it is, the state of the Ukrainian defenses, the weapons Volodymyr Zelensky has requested, namely tanks and fighters, whether his requests are justified, whether they're being met, whether we're getting promises or reality, what responses we've received from the EU and NATO and from the US. What is our policy on supplying weapons to Ukraine? What is the situation in Congress? Enough questions? The extent to which the US has delivered, or we believe they will deliver in time, tanks and fighters to Ukraine. And the primary question is it enough? Welcome to the show, you guys. Tim, let me ask you, I'll go to the bottom line right away. Are we doing enough to help Ukraine win this war and throw the Russians out?
Not as much as we can or ought to. Number one is, we've already given them $29.3 billion by the year end 2022. We're on a good clip to continue spending for Ukraine's defense. But there's a factor that is non-monetary, and that is, what are we doing to counter Putin's propaganda? We're starting to lose the synergy of support for Ukraine in Congress. You could start to see certain members really question our involvement in Ukraine. We're starting to see that in the EU as well. So it's paramount, in my opinion, to counter propaganda and if you will, start making overtures of support, be it through marketing or our own propaganda. Who knows what you want to call it? But that is something that needs to be done, in my opinion. And we're falling behind on support for the war and continued support for the war. And I think it's vital and critical that Ukraine remains solvent and whole and repel the Russians.
So, Stephanie, Tim says we. Well, who's we? We is Congress, because without Congress, Joe Biden can't do this. And I sense that he's trying to walk a tightrope on this. We made a commentary. There's a commentary online called by the same title. Are we doing enough to help Ukraine? And the question is whether this country collectively, in terms of its government, is doing enough and will do enough. We have problems in Congress. We have some people in Congress who don't belong in Congress. Are they going to be able to ultimately stop the support or slow the support down to the point where it is ineffectual? What do you think?
Well, I'm thinking, I'm surprised that there hasn't been a big to-do about this. I mean, instead, right now we've got the fifth grade nonsense going on, all the weaponization of the institutions of America against its own self. And then we've got, of course, the famous laptop investigation going on, which not more than 16% of people poll any interest in a president's kid not holding any office should be looked into. So what I'm thinking is, when are they going to come around to agreeing that the feedback they're getting in the committee is saying, hey, stop, this isn't interesting, nobody cares? Because then the next agenda item, I think, will be against the Ukraine support. So I'm a little bit confused here with all of the liberal nonsense and detesting it, wanting it to go away, and a little worried because this other one might rise up and be, let's not give them any more money and certainly we ought to work on this and maybe I shouldn't say it because maybe they haven't thought of it yet, the fifth graders, but they could use this one, on the debt ceiling. So, I mean, it's just crazy. And I'm so worried. And I think Zelensky is too. I think you can see it. He's kind of getting down to being, a one-note player here. He's beating his drum, same note.
Well, well, why should we care? I'm playing the devil's advocate. Why should we care about whether Zelensky wins or loses?
Yeah. Well, I think we need to care because Russia is a pirate. And we should care that the United Nations has not been working on some approaches to this to bring in some mediation or some way of approaching these issues, because now that it's happened once and there's no remedy, there's no intervention. It's not, nobody's come up with anything to wind it down. It's just all chugging along as long as Russia can get another piece of equipment out there and a bunch of bullets to shoot people with. I'm totally, it's deplorable. Nobody's coming up with any possible solutions or strategies or tactics to end it. So where is the world on this? Because we cannot say it's okay to just rush in and take a country. I mean, that then we're over. Then we don't even need the satellite.
Tim, let's assume for a minute that Joe Biden runs into trouble. He's already starting to run into trouble from the crazies in Congress. Can he hold Europe together by himself? Can he arrange weapons by himself? Does he have the authority? Does he have the influence, the twist, the leadership to do it without Congress?
To do it without Congress, it's a bad choice. It's a bad road to go down to. I say remember what Congress is. In the House, you've got 20 fifth graders. I love that term that Stephanie uses, fifth grade MAGA. In fact, you're insulting fifth graders, by the way. It's really the second graders. It's 20 MAGA crazies that is the tail wagging the dog. And I think Joe Biden needs to use the bully pulpit to remind people that if you fail to pay attention to history, you're doomed to repeat it. And I think of September 1, 1939, when Germany attacked Poland. This is a mirror image of those days. Mm-hmm. And this is Russia trying to, take completely over Ukraine. And do you think for one moment he'll stop with Ukraine? Definitely not.
You said before, and I totally agree, this is more than just a kinetic war. This is a world war of propaganda. And Vladimir Putin is out there every day trying to get friends everywhere. But Joe Biden has got to respond to that, doesn't he? I mean, does he have any clout, any twist, any ability to go, for example, to Viktor Orban and say, stop resisting Scandinavia into NATO? Can he go to Erdogan in Turkey and say, look, you got to join it? Can he go to Netanyahu in Israel and say, stop fooling around? We need your support. We can't, and various countries in Africa and Latin America that Vladimir Putin has been trying to subvert, to say nothing of course, China, which is playing it on the fence right now. Right. But can't Biden go non-kinetic and match Putin, not only in the propaganda you talk about, but in the foreign policy discussions, the conversations with all these autocrats, where he would get them to stop supporting Putin? What do you think?
Oh, my memory lane is working too well. Ronald Reagan, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. That moment would be a great moment, but Joe Biden is not up to the task. He's not the great orator that Ronald Reagan was. So you're right. He's going to have behind-the-scene meetings. But guess what? Those don't work so well with Joe Biden, because look what happened to Saudi Arabia. He was basically punked. And the bottom line is he could get on, balance scrape all he wants to Erdogan and all the others. I don't know if they're listening to him anymore. So he's going to have to use the bully pulpit on a public scene and perhaps shame them into support of Ukraine and shame those 20 MAGA members of the House of Representatives into the same. And I think he knows how to do that. But I don't think you have a groundswell moment of persuasion and rhetoric that wins the day for him.
Stephanie, they took a poll a few months ago, actually the beginning of the war, and found that 60% of Americans favored support to Ukraine. But took a poll more recently, reported in the paper, that it was more like 40% right now. So the American public is not as supportive as it was at the beginning of the war. This is tragic because the war is even more outrageous. It's totally outrageous. We forget how outrageous it is to destroy a society. We're kind of getting lulled into this this rhythm of blowing up cities and killing civilians. I mean, it's amazing that we stand by, but the American public seems to be losing its interest. What does this tell us? It's not just the guys in Congress; it's the American public who are losing their interest in supporting Ukraine. Can you explain that, and what does that mean going forward?
There you go. Everything you say is so true, and everybody's losing interest. I mean, it's very fearful. I mean, these moves by Gorbachev, this against everybody's principles, everybody's values, all a human interest, and the same thing with Turkey. There's not enough people running over there. Where are all the Doctors Without Borders? I mean, I see. We're getting numb to all of this sort of thing. And so I go back now to the only way we have to go is to take and strengthen our institutions. And that means NATO and the United Nations. And certainly the United Nations should be doing all those things you listed, Jay, about what Biden has to do. Biden can't do all that. He's got full plate back here. That's the United Nations is supposed to do that. And certainly the NATO could be doing something, and there needs to be something maybe to get some tension up, and that could be NATO and UN, and not threaten because we've got this nuclear war problem. But these things are not even being discussed in the headlines, and they should be. I'm appalled, as you say. You're appalled. What is going on? And Petraeus had something to say. General Petraeus is going to have something to say. I think later today they're interviewing him. He's going to make some comments about how this war is going to end. I have no more to say about it than that, but everybody should watch to see what this man, experienced general, has to say to us. Yeah,
anybody can speculate how this war is going to end.
Yeah,
I think the one thing we can speculate is it's not going to end soon. When we talked about Tim, we talked about sending the planes in or allowing them to be sent in when Russia was bombing everything with their planes all over Ukraine, and we went chicken on that. And so we didn't send fighters. We sent missiles later, but we didn't send fighters, and we haven't really sent fighters yet. Furthermore, Russia has got this thing about tanks, and they want to have a land war in their spring offensive. And there's been all this discussion about the Russian tanks and the English tanks and the Polish tanks, and the Americans are like holding back. Everybody's waiting on Biden to give the nod for the tanks. I'm not sure a single tank has actually gone in there yet. And this is really bad because you need tanks to deal with tanks. At the end of the day, you've got to have a countervailing tank force. So and it's all about being afraid of Putin's nuclear threats. So this is a two-part question. Should we be afraid of nuclear threats? And because of that, should we be holding up on supplying them with real weapons? The planes and the tanks, and wouldn't that help? And what's the balance of judgment on that right now?
Well, we are falling into Putin's trap of nuclear threats. He's been doing it for decades, in one way or another, mentioning the possibility of a nuclear strike, tactical nuclear strike. So should we pay attention to it? Yes. Should we be cautious of it? Yes. Should it allow us to swim in the deep end of the pool with one hand tied behind our backs, trying to aid and support Ukraine? No. Tanks are one thing. Fighter jets, F-16s is another. But right now, the mission is get normal ammunition to the Ukrainians. My God, their tanks are antiquated. They don't even make half that ammunition anymore. And somehow industries, 24 hours, 7 days a week, needs to start producing this ammunition that they desperately need, because fighter jets and tanks won't matter if they're overrun here shortly. And so right now, what they really need is just good old-fashioned ammunition, mortar rounds, 50 caliber machine gun ammunition, their tank shells. All those things are critically needed right now, and that's what we need to focus on right now.
So, Stephanie, there was an article in yesterday's Times about a town in Donetsk in the east where the Ukrainians presented very well, and they routed a whole bunch of Russian soldiers who are young and inexperienced and maybe not committed and undersupplied in their own way. And I wonder, it seems like you have something in the press on odd days, which makes you optimistic, and you have something in the press on even days, which makes you pessimistic. What should we be, listening to? Should we be optimistic or pessimistic that the Ukrainians can do this without a whole lot of help?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we ought to be optimistic, and I think that we ought to be clear about how much we're depending on the Russian people to finally rise up and rout this Putin out of there. I'm suspecting that that's what the plan is, but it's not working fast enough. And even with the sanctions on them, they're not getting hit hard enough, although it seems like I've read it's increasing. So the more work on what is it that we're trying to do to dissuade Russia, short of nuking them. And we're already doing some things. Could we have a report back up on that? Where are the sanctions? What's about the oil? What about happened over the winter? What's going to happen now? It's not winter anymore. Everything's going to get spring, and everybody's going to be out there fighting. And what are we doing to get in the way of the Russian progress? In addition to the help that we're giving to Ukraine,
we could hope that Radio Free Europe and all those other avenues trying to dissuade Russians against this war against Ukraine is great, but it's the drop in the bucket of what's necessary. And it's estimated right now that there's over 200,000 Russians that have been killed in this 1 year. That will be a drop in the bucket if people rise up in Russia. And Putin will have no problem of basically killing his own citizens in the streets of Moscow or any other city in Russia. So although I agree with Stephanie, that's an important aspect. It means nothing to Putin. And quite frankly, it's not going to deter Putin from his advances to Ukraine. So the bottom line is, again, as I said the last time I spoke, is ammunition is the key right now. And then the higher technologies. But remember, Jay, those technologies, the Abrams tanks, the F-16s, we're talking months and months and months before delivery because they just don't operate themselves. You need qualified personnel that's been trained and educated on this weaponry. And so that is down the road type of solution. And what are you going to do for the Ukrainians right now? I mean, my God, their soldiers are fighting to the last man on the lines. But it doesn't happen by magic. It's only through the aid of our weaponry, Stinger missiles, things of that nature that have won the day for the Ukrainians, and that needs to continue.
Well, continue, but here we are in a crisis. I mean, they're being killed. Their infrastructure is being destroyed, even their reservoirs, their power grid being destroyed. And, after a period of time, even though he throws a lot of bodies at them and kills his own troops, Putin will erode their society to the point where they cannot fight back. There's nothing left, and that they are demoralized. This is a risk coming soon. And so what I don't get is why people don't see this outside, why they don't see it in the EU and NATO, why Biden doesn't see it, why Congress and the American people don't see it. Time is of the essence. This is so critical that one day there's a fair chance that for the lack of support, it will collapse, and that'll be the end of the liberal world order. How much time do we have, do you think? Can this last for a year, 2, 3? Go ahead.
No, not much. I don't think.
The question. Yeah. How long? Is it just going to go on for the next 5 years? Let me just suggest this. Why can't we send in the Rangers and the other bomb squatters and all those people into Russia and take care of business over there, like their
Stephanie, that's World War III.
Well, that's what I was going to say. But they said it was if we helped Ukraine, we wouldn't be breaking the sort of like gentleman's agreement that we don't go into Ukraine. Okay, so let's go into Russia and get them.
That's a World War III.
No.
Can't do that, Stephanie.
No, that would be seen as a direct provocation and invitation for World War III against Russia versus the United States. Direct. It's our military attacking their country. Their motherland, fatherland, and guess what? That's not going to go well.
Well, Stephanie, let me ask you this, though.
No.
You have the young people leaving Russia. You have the newspapers, the independent newspapers. Vladimir Putin is crushing them all. There's one that's operating in Eastern Europe, outside of Russia, that is pretty healthy, and they're sending information into Russia. But bottom line is that Russian state TV has got everybody bamboozled, everybody believing that this is a legitimate war. So the question I put to you is, there's a war going on, arguably, in Russia between Putin and the Russians, who are starting, hopefully, to get the message. Is there time for that? Is it time for them to, withdraw their support, even bring him down, because of the contention between Putin and the ordinary Russian people, if any?
Well, can I suggest we get the proponent out of jail? Could we do that? Would that be nuclear threat if we sneak in there and release the hero?
That'd be very big provocation.
I mean,
very big provocation.
Or make it look like we get the pussy rioters to start, doing some, charm initiatives and singing around the prison and, seeing it. But come on, we need to get.
The old problem is we. You keep saying we, and who is we? It's not Joe Biden, because he's intimidated, clearly, to go beyond his own limitation, his own red line.
Exactly.
Hey, in defense of what Stephanie just said, they just had a gathering of moms in one of the major cities, all holding arms and not afraid of the camera, basically saying, "Knock it off, Putin. We're done with you." That was an act of bravery and courage, unbelievable. But Putin's not beyond taking them off to the gulag either. But there they were.
Yeah, and they rejected. They threw away their fur coats. They were evidently given fur coats because they lost their kids in the war. So obviously that the incentives are not working on Putin's side. So there again, we need more information about how all that effect is and what that might mean can happen.
Okay, Tim, you've got to leave, but can you give us your thoughts here? What should we remember? What should we do? What can we, that is the ordinary people in the country, do to show Joe Biden and the Congress that we have got to take steps, or it will be lost?
Very simply, call your senator, call your House of Representative, and say, please continue to support Ukraine in all requests for ammunition, weaponry, and ancillary support. That's something that the Joe Q public can do. What can President Biden do? Get on the podium, his bully pulpit, have his best rhetoric speechwriters help him out, and convince the nation that this support for Ukraine is going to be critical and vital for future reduction of conflict in the world to come. And if Joe Biden doesn't do something like that and keep our 60% support for Ukraine from dropping down to 40, I don't know what his job is as President of the United States. He is vested in this effort. He should be vested in this effort, and he should use the tools vested in the President of the United States office to continue to keep those ratings and that support high, not 40%, but 60%.
One thing of interest is, the people in this country. How can we change the way they think about this? They've been subjected to social media. Some of it coming from Putin himself. We know that he does that for elections. He probably does that for public opinion on this kind of thing too. And and one last thing I would like to ask you to discuss is, how does this affect Joe Biden's ability to get the people of the country to vote for him? I mean, you have a separation now of a lot of people versus the Ukraine issue versus the 2024 election. How does it affect that?
Well, let's just acknowledge that Joe Biden's not the most top straight A student in rhetoric, persuasion, and motivation. And so what do you do if you're not an expert in something and you're president of the United States? Don't you surround yourself with people that are experts in this field and that will guide you and educate you and basically write your speech for you? And it's going to take words and avenues, social media, TV, radio. It'll take communication avenues to get the word out. But the word is more critical than the avenues. And Joe Biden needs help in that area. And we have the expertise. He just has to tap on the shoulder of those experts to help him along.
Let me ask you one final question: is if we lose, if Ukraine loses here, and Vladimir Putin takes over a fair part of it or all of it between now and 2024, is there a chance that that will be, such as Afghanistan, that will be on Joe Biden's head, won't it? And
absolutely,
it seems to me that completely pulls the rug out from any campaign he wants to make for president, because it will be a huge and dramatic failure, right?
Joe Biden is heavily invested in the Ukraine success, and without it, he won't be successful, and he might as well just forget about 2024 immediately.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. Let's.
Thank you, Jay.
What happens if the public continues in its drift away from Ukraine? What happens if the MAGA Republicans in the House keep on the track of withdrawing support for Ukraine? What happens if Joe Biden doesn't do what Tim was saying and speak up and treat this as an emergency, a time where time is of the essence? What happens?
Well, I think it's such a good question, Jay, because it's possible that could be the demise of Ukraine. Because if people are going to lose interest, and if that's not going to be as influential on Putin's run for second term, which it might not be if people really don't care and don't want us to put more money into it. So, I mean, there's just dreadful consequences here of this mess. So I know that what Tim said is right. And I don't know if we still do Voice of America, but I do know they took down a lot of that equipment and infrastructure a couple years ago. So is that still funded in addition to the media? Plus, don't we have spies over there that can do stuff too? So this is the thing. We're not hearing. Joe Biden needs to unleash the organs that we have to unleash on Russia in that secretive way, in that espionage and intelligence way. And it has to be max. Maybe it is max. It's just so hard to have it have effect. But maybe they are doing that. We don't know about it. But he does need to do more. He needs to ramp up the UN. They've got to take a stance on this or everybody's in jeopardy. And we've got Taiwan sitting around the corner here, right next on the list, to be in this exact same situation, even with the Ukraine not settled. So it's a major issue that he needs to deal with, but he has to balance it against what's the people's interest and how to keep the interest up and how to meet the immediate needs of Zelensky that he's calling for all this weaponry, which it seems like we can get away with giving them as much of that as we can. So go with that, but it's not enough. It's not enough. And
not enough. And I worry that this is, ultimately not going to work. And if
it's going to end. I mean, and we've got to come up with a package of strategies for dealing with this kind of piracy. I mean, so, okay, the Vikings, ruled Europe for 900 years or 600 years. They terrorized the whole side of things there, but that came under control. Now the Somali pirates are doing the same thing. So we need to take this on like we have these other huge major threats, and we have to figure it out, even when it seems insoluble.
Indeed. Well, thank you, Stephanie. Stephanie Dalton, a regular contributor, and Tim Apicella. I'm Jay Fidell. And right after the show is over, we are going to play a commentary that I wrote about Ukraine, asking the same question: are we doing enough? And we'll see you next week for more. Aloha.
Aloha. Mahalo.
Aloha. Thanks for considering the views expressed in this ThinkTech commentary, which asks whether we are doing enough to help Ukraine. Russia, and that means Putin, has started a big spring offensive against Ukraine, and is sending a rain of deadly missiles down on civilian men, women and children every day, destroying their country, and killing more and more of them against all the rules of war and war crimes. It's clear enough that Zelensky is justified in asking the West for weapons that will enable Ukraine to more effectively defend itself against Putin's aggression. Every day we read about discussions and intentions by the West to deliver the weapons Zelensky has requested, but we don't read that the West has actually delivered those weapons. Of course, this leaves Zelensky and Ukraine at a huge disadvantage. The EU and NATO are not together on this. And the US is not together on it either, reflecting the continuing dysfunction in Congress and the increasing reluctance of many Republicans to spend money on defending Ukraine. Joe Biden seems to be walking a political tightrope on what to do. He wants Europe to believe he'll come through, but at the same time he wants to minimize the risk of escalation, and also to defer criticism from the Republicans. As a result, he is playing both ends against the middle, and hesitating on actually sending the weapons to help Ukraine. But time is of the essence, and this may turn out to be a really bad strategy. We need a much more concerted effort. We need unequivocal leadership from Joe Biden on this issue. We need him to lead the US and Europe to provide what Zelensky has requested. Ukraine's future, Europe's future, the future of the liberal world order, and the future of the US itself depends on it. Half-steps and half-hearted compromises are a recipe for disaster. How about it, Mr. President? How about sending those Abrams tanks right away? If Poland and Germany can do it, so can you. How about giving the Ukrainians the F-16 fighters they asked for, which you really should have given them when the Russians started bombing them a year ago? Don't be faint of heart. Don't be put off by Putin's mind games. Don't be afraid of Marjorie Taylor Greene. You're stronger than that. At this point, we need you to step up and show Ukraine and Russia and the world that you and the US are still global leaders. Think of the international disaster that will follow complacency, inaction or half-steps on this. That will lead to the fall of Ukraine, the validation of autocracy in Russia, China and many other places around the world. It will put the pennies on the eyes of the liberal world order that the US has worked so hard to build since World War II. And worst of all, it will send an irrefutable message everywhere that the US is impotent, and that autocrats can invade their neighbors anytime they wish, with impunity. You did not spend much time on this in your State of the Union, and frankly we wondered why. Were you concerned about reaction from the Republicans? Are you just lowering the bar for American foreign policy? Are you catering to isolationists, taking the easy path? That will not advance our national interest or protect our core values. Mr. President, it's time for you to step up and help Ukraine by providing the weapons it has requested, before it is simply and tragically too late. Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine, and Eastern Europe, are counting on you. The US, divided or not, is also counting on you. 2023 can be a year of admirable achievement, if we can help the Ukrainians beat back the Russian aggression. Or, it can be a year of tragic if not disastrous failure if we fail to do so. And that, of course, will have a huge effect on your credibility and your candidacy in the 2024 election. Your choice, Mr. President. How about doing the right thing? Thanks so much for considering the views expressed in this ThinkTech commentary. Aloha.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.